Welcome to Find Laws, Don't Judge Me, the show about the law in real life. I'm Laura Temmie, and I'm joined in this happy new year by Joe Fawbush.
We're back and better than ever.
Well, I guess that remains to be seen. We'll do our best.
Knock on wood, right?
And Vedahi Mehta.
Hey, welcome to Year of the Rabbit.
Hi. Woohoo!
2023 looking strong. And what happened on the first of this year, one of many things being things went into the public domain.
Yes, Public Domain Day, which I'm such a nerd that I love Public Domain Day, and most people have no idea what that is. Yeah, we have a really interesting show for you today. We're talking about some of my favorite things, copyright law, the public domain, and horror movies.
Ooh,
so
that'll do it.
Yeah, I think before we get too much into the weeds, I need to mention the movie event of the year that is coming up on February 15th. And this is just, I can't wait.
I'm actually so excited about this.
Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey.
You heard that right, folks.
Yes, it's a Winnie the Pooh horror film.
I know. I will not watch it, actually. I don't think so, anyway. This is one of those movies. It's a slasher film. It looks like it was filmed on an iPhone with a budget of about $50.
It probably was.
Yeah, right.
Poor Alan Alexander Milne is rolling in his grave.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's kind of as awful as you would think it is. It's about Christopher Robin comes back to the 100-acre wood, and Winnie the Pooh and Piglet have felt abandoned and have become feral wild animals, but he's still in human shape. So
well, that's the thing that I'll be honest with you, I'm gonna watch it. I'm
gonna watch it. Joe, you know your kids are going to want to watch it. You're not going to take them?
That would traumatize them for life.
Very violent. It's going to be very violent.
Not G-rated.
I'm definitely going to watch it. The thing that's freaking me out about it, watching the trailer, is it's not it's not a CG bear or anything like this, or they have human hands.
Because they're just wearing a mask? Is that what it is?
And so it looks like just people with masks. And so I feel like for me that was a missed opportunity, but I don't know. Like I said, I'm still going to watch it.
It looks like a kind of a typical serial killer in the woods, only he's wearing a bad Winnie the Pooh Halloween costume instead of a hockey mask.
Exactly, yeah.
But other than that, it's every trope that you could think of for a slasher film. There's
it's a bunch of college kids in a cabin somewhere. It's going to be fun. But, I guess we should get to our legal point, since we're a legal podcast. But the legal question here is, why is this movie happening now?
Yeah, why, given that it's such an obviously great idea, hasn't it happened before?
And the original author of Winnie the Pooh probably didn't see it going in this direction. Dear. So how did we get here is the question.
You were talking about the January 1st celebration for copyright nerds. So the original book has now entered the public domain. And so creators are able to use those characters, but just the characters from the original book. Mm-hmm. And they can come up with their own stories, their own movies to a certain extent, which I'm going to leave that in your capable hands, Laura, so I don't say the wrong thing. But yeah, there's definitely, Disney, of course, would never have allowed this 2 years ago, but now they don't really have a choice. The movie has actually been very careful about not interfering with Disney stuff. It's pretty clear that it's not a Disney movie from the trailer.
Yeah. So I guess I'm gonna try to keep this from being boring, because it all comes down to this pretty simple question of how long does a copyright last? Because the reason that this movie is able to be released now is because the characters from the original Winnie the Pooh book are no longer protected by copyright. And that seems like a pretty simple question, but the answer is really complicated, even for the legal world, partially because before 1978, the United States had this truly unhinged copyright process that required registration and renewal, and I don't want to bore anyone with the details, so I'll just say it was a whole thing. Meanwhile, I don't want to do full-on time-traveling lawyer today. We don't need to get into it. But meanwhile, Europe was pretty much unified in its copyright duration. So countries had signed on to the 1886 Berne Convention, which agreed that copyright protection would last for the lifetime of the author plus another 50 years. And by the mid-70s, Congress said, okay, enough already. And they passed the Copyright Act of 1976, which did a couple of really important things. It removed registration and copyright notice requirements and replaced it with what we have now, which is the fixed in a tangible medium requirement. Essentially, and a lot of people might not know this, you can have a copyright in something without registering it. Essentially, as soon as you write it down, record it, paint it, whatever, it's yours. It also codified the fair use defense to copyright infringement, and most importantly to what we're talking about today, it created a fixed copyright term of life of the author plus 50 years and 75 years for a couple other like specific types of works. So copyright protection lasts for the life of the author plus 50 years, right? Wrong. So now I have to time travel a little bit. I want to take you to 1998. The highest grossing movie is Saving Private Ryan. The Furby is the hottest, most terrifying toy on the market.
Not as terrifying as the Shelby, I have to say.
Oh, yeah, I forgot.
Do you remember that?
One. Yep.
It's naked mole rat cousin.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Oh.
And, well, Andy's not here, but I have to throw this one in just for him. 76 million people tuned in to watch the series finale of Seinfeld.
I was one of them.
So 5 years before this, the European Union had adopted a new rule for copyright terms, which extended copyright protection to the life of the author plus 70 years. And that sounded pretty good to some high-profile copyright holders in the US, namely Disney, which only had about 10 years left on its copyright for the earliest version of Mickey Mouse. So Disney and others lobbied Congress, and in 1998, they passed the Copyright Extension Act. So the copyright duration for new works was life of the author plus 70 years, but the act also extended protection for existing works, which made Disney very, very happy. This meant that nothing new would enter the public domain between 1998 and 2019, and meant that Mickey Mouse would remain under copyright for about another quarter century. Just a little side note about when I was first learning this. So I learned copyright law from the late, great Ken Port, who was a pretty well-known scholar in copyright and trademark. And when we were discussing this law change in the 1990s, I complained about this freezing of the public domain. And he called me a communist. And I gotta be honest, it was my favorite day of law school. He just says, Laura, I wasn't aware that you were a communist. And he just would say things like that. So, but yeah, it's an interesting thing, and the public people have differing opinions about the public domain and its importance. Some people argue that strong copyright protection helps to foster more creativity, and some people argue that a robust public domain helps foster creativity. Apparently, I'm a communist because I'm
there's some First Amendment concerns at play if things can't go speedily to the public domain, right?
Right. Well, and yeah, the Constitution kind of requires copyrights to expire eventually.
Yeah, sort of, but it also gives Congress power to extend existing copyrights, which has been the source of some heated, litigation. Like some folks tried to argue that the Congress doesn't have the ability to keep extending copyright extensions like they have been throughout the decades, because the ability to extend it indefinitely could just give it the ability to have no time limits at all on copyrights, which, it's supposed to have a limited time on copyrights.
Well, it's similar to patents that way, where like patents have an expiration date. A patent can only go for so long, and then you're done, and then it becomes part of the public domain. Meanwhile, trademarks, in a way, can go on forever.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's an interesting thing in IP.
Yeah, and so far the Supreme Court has said, hey, Congress is, the fact that they've extended it time and again, and now, they just keep extending it. It's okay, because so far they haven't done anything that's so egregious that it looks like they're just gonna do away with the time limits. But that could be an argument in the future if if Congress keeps trying to extend it. And you know, sometimes the proponents of Congress's extensions have argued a number of things, but amongst them has been, well, life expectancy has increased since the copyright statute was first at play. So with increased life expectancy, you need to have increased times on copyrights for it to be viable.
So how are we compared to Europe now? Do we have more? Do we have less? Is it the same?
Since the Copyright Extension Act, we are in line with the European Union with life of the author plus 70 years. So, which is why it was pretty unlikely that Congress was going to try to extend this again. I mean, at least in my opinion, I don't foresee that happening because the Europe and I believe most Asian countries as well, it's life of the author plus 70 years. Yeah.
Yeah. So that would be very hard to justify extending it because one of the key rationales for extending it in the first place is like, hey, the rest of the world is in line. Let's get in line. So then if you all of a sudden go back and say, no, let's get out of line again, then you're kind of, so that does make sense why there wasn't.
And historically,
such a push.
Historically the EU has seemed to have stronger copyright protections than we have. So the Mickey Mouse Act, more properly known as the Sonny Bono Copyright Term Extension Act, which is the 1998 one that Laura just referenced, it was retroactive in the sense that it extended like the terms of protection for works that were already copyrighted and created before the act took place, but it did not. It's not retroactive in the sense that it didn't revive copyrights that had already expired. And I will say that the EU's copyright legislation even revived copyrights that were expired. So in a sense, they're still a little bit stronger than ours.
Yeah, they pulled some stuff back out of the public domain. That's true. Yeah, whereas here, anything that was already public domain stayed there. Yeah. I always think of it as that, like, I always think of the public domain as if it's an actual place, like the way I talk about
Me too. Me too.
Like, I didn't realize that until just now, but whenever I refer to it, it's like this magical land of
like a town square in Disney World or something?
Yeah, or almost like the afterlife or something. Like once you go there, you can't come back. Like that's it. You're done.
It's like the graveyard of
right.
Copyright graveyard. So the EU was able to revive like copyright zombies from that graveyard, and we can't. Like in the United States, once you're out there, you're out there.
Right.
I kind of want to go back to the Winnie the Pooh Blood and Horror movie real quick. So, like I said, it's a terrible representation of Winnie the Pooh.
That's your opinion, Joe.
Yeah, no, that's totally a subjective opinion. Don't sue me. But I think partially that was intentional because, we're talking about public domain and copyright. And so I don't know if either of you have read the original Winnie the Pooh book anytime recently, but the drawings in that book don't look anything like the Disney character that we know and love, with the red shirt, no pants thing.
Right. Yeah.
And some of the characters from Disney weren't in the book originally.
Yeah, Tigger, most notably. Tigger.
And maybe Eeyore?
Yeah.
No, Eeyore was in there. Yeah, Eeyore was in there. He looks different.
Rabbit?
I think the only one who wasn't in the original book was Tigger.
Oh, okay.
But I mean, Disney did add characters to their movies like Gopher and maybe even Kanga.
Maybe Kanga and Roo.
Yeah, I think that might.
I can't remember.
Yeah. But yeah, so it partially because Disney does have a trademark on its interpretation of the original Winnie the Pooh. So if this horror movie had a cartoon that opened up with, the Disney song and they had Winnie the Pooh in his red shirt and all of those things and then all of a sudden it turned into a slasher flick, they would, I mean, not only would they anger every parent in America, but they also would, would be in legal trouble because, they can't try to pass it off as like a Disney movie. It's just, this is Winnie the Pooh. It's in the public domain. We're going to take it in this wildly different direction.
So the red shirt is a trademark and not a copyright?
And not the red shirt itself, but just what, like the current image of Winnie the Pooh.
It's trade dress, right?
Well, and that's where it all gets kind of interesting, where even if we talk about Mickey Mouse, where next year in 2024, the copyright on Mickey Mouse will expire. but it's only the earliest version of Mickey Mouse. So that's like way, way back Steamboat Willie when he's on his little boat.
Whistling,
and, whistling.
Yep.
And I think back then he wore pants and no shirt. Is that right?
Yeah, he had
Instead of
pants
shirt
on.
and no pants. I think it was pants and suspenders and no shirt. And so, yeah, like if someone wanted to make some version of Steamboat Willie, they could do that. But they wouldn't be able to do a recreation of what's the show
gloved,
that's
the
on
white
now,
gloved
like
Mickey Mouse.
Yes, exactly, white glove, yellow button Mickey Mouse, or like his voice and things like that. That's where public domain can get a little interesting, where certain versions of a character are fair game and some aren't.
And I guess the characters that from Winnie the Pooh that Disney came up with that were not in the original book, at least Tigger, that's probably a reason that there's no Tigger, I assume, in this horror movie, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Yep.
then they actually limited it to only the two characters, Pooh and Piglet.
Okay.
Like I said, I think they were actually pretty careful.
It sure looks like it, yeah.
Yeah, I was a little bit surprised because it does kind of look like a low budget, but I think it's actually kind of embracing the whole thing. Mm-hmm. I think their idea is like, oh, maybe it'll be really scary and people will love it, but if not, everybody's going to think it's funny who goes to see it.
Yeah, I mean, the big difference in what Blood and Honey is doing versus if somebody just straight up pulled the illustrations that we see in modern Winnie the Pooh books is this idea of like an idea versus an expression, which is a pretty big doctrine in copyright law.
Yeah, sometimes you'll refer to this idea as the idea expression distinction or the idea expression dichotomy. And it's kind of a legal doctrine that's been around, articulated by the Supreme Court for a while. The Supreme Court has said that unlike a patent, a copyright gives no exclusive right to the art disclosed. It's only given to the expression of the idea and not the idea itself, which a patent would. And so this is striking a balance between what we talked about earlier, First Amendment rights and the copyright protections by allowing somewhat, free communication of like facts, but still protecting an author's creative expression.
Yeah, it's not what you say so much as how you say it, basically.
Yeah, often. So, you guys are nerds. You'll be familiar with.
Wow.
We all are. We all are on this podcast.
All right.
I say that with love. Maybe
I'm
it's
pretty cool,
good that
but okay.
Andy isn't here because he would possibly not. He would possibly be making more fun of us. But we're all familiar with Star Wars, The Matrix, The Wizard of Oz. Countless other examples arguably follow a similar pattern that some people might recognize as maybe the hero's journey. Mm-hmm. Now, this might be a bad example because the concept of hero's journey is so old that it's not like there's someone who holds a copyright to it. But let's say George Lucas wanted to copyright this concept or formula, which you could argue a number of movies after Star Wars Episode 4 have used. He can't do that. You can't copyright this idea or this formula. Anyone can use the general formula that Lucas or arguably countless other people have used to make their own adventure stories, so long as it's not the same dialogue lines or the same characters or the same super similar plot or really the same exact story. So it's really, hard sometimes to say what can and can be copyrighted. And so I have some fun little hypos that we can go through. I think they're fun.
Pop quiz time.
Pop quiz
I
time.
can dust off my copyright law studies. Let's go.
Yeah, this is Laura. Hopefully you will nail this.
Hopefully.
And not fail this.
Yeah, maybe I should go first, and then Laura can correct all of my answers so that they're actually correct.
Well, I think this will start to make sense as we go through.
Okay, all right.
So let's say Joe's planting his cucumber garden, and you come up with this really effective method of getting your cucumbers to thrive because oh yeah, Joe, you have a bunch of pets, right?
Yes.
What is the weirdest pet you have?
Probably the hedgehog.
Definitely a hedgehog. Okay, so let's say,
cute.
What is his name?
Bristol.
That's a fantastic fantastically appropriate.
Yeah, it's my daughter's pet, and she was very excited to name her Bristol. Yeah. She is cute. I will say she's cute. She's only bitten me once.
Let's say Bristol pees on your cucumbers and they just shoot up like Jack's beanstalk, and you're like, oh my God, I gotta write a book about this. I can get rich off this. I gotta tell the world. So you write a book, you describe this revolutionary hedgehog pee technique in your gardening book, and people are like, well, that's weird, and it's a total flop. Okay. Laura picks up a copy of your book, she's like, what is this? She tries it for herself, and she's like, whoa, my cucumbers are next level. Now she writes another book using your same hedgehog pee method in her own words, and her book totally takes off. Can you sue her for copyright infringement?
I wish, but probably not unless I got a patent.
Not unless you got a patent, in which you could maybe sue her for patent violation.
Yeah.
But yeah, Laura copying your idea, even your exact method, but putting it in her own words, that's not copyrightable. It's not copyright infringement. And this was a famous case called Baker v. Selden. Supreme Court explained that, a book did not give an author the right to exclude others from practicing what was described in that book. So exclusive rights to what they call a useful art, like apparently hedgehog pea gardening, is only available in patent for protection. That one seems like it makes sense, right? Yeah. But the good thing is that there are intellectual protections for it. It's just not copyright. That's why this distinction is pretty important.
Yep.
So, okay, that one, patent covers that. But there's ones that are trickier, right? So are either of y'all into poetry?
On occasion.
I feel like it's harder and harder to find people who are genuinely into poetry these days. But you guys will see like friends who like want to be really smart that'll have a collection of poetry on their coffee table or like a big book of Van Gogh's paintings, like coffee table reads, right? So often those kinds of books are not, whoever made the Van Gogh book did not make the Van Gogh paintings, right? Whoever published the poetry collection did not write those poems. So like, what's going on here? Is there no copyright violation? And is there no copyright protection for that book? So Laura, let's say you're really into poetry and you think you can do better than all these snobby coffee table reads that you see at Barnes & Noble. And you want to publish your own anthology by, oh man, everyone that comes to mind for me is so old that their stuff is probably in the public domain. I literally can't think of any poet whose works is probably not in the public domain. So whatever, let's just say you want to publish a bunch of poems by living authors whose works are still under copyright protection. Can you do that? Well, sure, but not without their permission. Okay, you got to get these authors' permission to use their poems in your collection. So you call up the poets, you get their permission, and you publish Laura's collection of pretentious poems to impress your friends.
That's exactly what I would call it, too.
That's cool. You can do that because you got their permission, but recall, you do not then magically get the copyright to these poems, right? You can't just... Someone letting you use their works is not the same as someone assigning you the copyright. Nor do you need to hold the copyright in order to publish them, as long as you have the permission. So that's an important distinction, permission and getting the copyrights transferred. So now moving on, if Joe sees you write this collection of poetry and he's like, oh, cool. Well, Laura stole my book. I want to make some side hustle money because my gardening book was a flop. So he's like, well, that looks easy. Like, Laura did this, you got the permission. Can Joe do that? So let's say, Joe calls up all these poets and they're like, Jesus, why are all these Thomson Reuters folks bothering me? Okay, fine, Joe, you can use my poems too. Cool. Well, then Joe goes and publishes his own anthology of these same poems. Can he do that? Yeah?
Yep. As long as he arranges them differently.
There we go. It gets tricky, right? If Joe... And I don't even know like how differently you'd have to arrange them, because a collection can be copyrighted depending on, so you would have to distinguish your collection. Like, it might even have to be a different list. It might not even be, Laura could possibly copyright you if you had the same list but in a different order maybe.
Is that something that could potentially lead to litigation? Like, let's say I do that and I change out one poem and I modify the introduction that Laura wrote, so instead of her 2 pages, it's my 2 pages. Is that something that might be worth litigating over because it's a close question, or is it pretty well established that if you just do a few things differently, it's okay?
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and quick say I'm certainly not an expert in this. It was my favorite thing to study in law school, and that's about the extent of it. I just don't want to get in trouble. But yeah, it gets into a lot of times what we talk about in copyright is substantial similarity. And with an anthology kind of a thing, you have to find a way to differentiate it, whether it's reordering the poems, changing out a few of them.
It can be a gray area and worth litigating for sure. Sure. And sometimes it'll be like circuit by circuit or case by case. But I guess a common understanding is that certain things like collections or lists are often, they don't have copyright protection in and of themselves. So a great example is a cookbook, right? So how are cookbooks published? Well, like a cookbook is a compilation of recipes. A cookbook can be protected under copyright law as so if you just have a list of recipe ingredients, right? Y'all remember, oh man, the Nestle Toll House chocolate chip cookies bag. On the back of it, it'll have that famous recipe that I'm sure everyone's used. I've used it so many times growing up. And, it's pretty basic. But if you were to take that same ingredient list, like however many cups of flour, baking soda, butter, whatever, and if you were to put that in your own cookbook and publish it, you could not be sued by Toll House or anybody else for using that ingredient list, so long as you didn't word for word regurgitate their steps. Cookbooks do have copyrights. So how do they get that? Or even blogs, someone's cooking blog. You guys will see on cooking blogs these days, like lots of blogs will have like a little life anecdote, like you'll be like, get to the point already. You have to like scroll all the way down to the bottom. I don't want to hear your life story.
Oh, I know.
But I think part of the reason they might want to do that is like because it adds protection, because it's an expression. When you describe a technique of cooking in a very particular way, that is what is copyrightable, but not the facts themselves.
Yeah, it's a little bit like trademark where, and we don't have time to get all the way into trademark, but we have sort of a spectrum of trademark strength. Copyright is kind of the same way, where different types of work are going to have different levels of copyright strength. And yeah, cookbooks and anthologies are a good example of like the lower end of the spectrum.
So yeah, that's all copyright stuff. But regardless of whether or not you can get a copyright for something, once you have it for a long time. And that's why Laura's favorite day of the year is Public Domain Day. You get to geek out about the fact, I guess movie studios and people who want to make adaptations and stuff like that get to have a new batch of sort of like public domain releases every year.
It's especially good for, speaking for myself, local theater producers, because then you can adapt things without having to pay for it.
Yeah. So adaptations are hard. And there have been like so many adaptations of, for example, Sherlock Holmes already. And for those of you guys that are following the news, you might or might not have heard about the fact that Arthur Conan Doyle's last work just released in the public domain, the casebook of Sherlock Holmes. And you might be like, well, we've seen so many adaptations of Sherlock Holmes, from Robert Downey Jr. to Benedict Cumberbatch to Lucy Liu. So many different adaptations. And you'll be like, well, if, he's only now coming into the public domain.
Well, Lucy Liu was Watson, just to be clear.
Okay. I don't remember that's right.
I just wanted to.
That's right. I don't know who the
I don't know, it's that British dude. I don't know what his name is. Sorry.
No. All that is to say, you might be wondering, well, okay, like we've seen the Sherlock Holmes character in countless forms. How has he had copyright protections up until now? Well, Laura, it gets kind of tricky, and you could probably explain this better than I can. But what happened just now is that the last book the case book of Sherlock Holmes released in the public domain, last of like a 12-set series or something like that. But the copyright of the character is different than the copyright of the book itself. And you can maybe explain that a little bit better, Laura.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's similar to the Mickey Mouse issue where, and especially if you're looking at a character that's from a series. I mean, obviously, for many, many years, the movie studios and BBC and whoever else was producing Sherlock Holmes content, they were paying Arthur Conan Doyle's estate for licensing to do that. So more than likely, they weren't dealing in public domain stuff.
Okay.
However, when a character is in a series like that, and we're actually seeing this now, where actually this year on Public Domain Day, a short story written by Agatha Christie is now part of the public domain, and it's the first introduction of Miss Marple, which is a very famous character of hers. Now, here's the thing. If I wanted to, say, create a stage adaptation of that story, I could do that now that that's public domain. However, anything that character does later on in later books, I can't use yet. And that's the same with Sherlock Holmes in the past, where if somebody, as these books start to come into the public domain, depending on when they were published, then it's, yeah, like, so people could use elements from, this book, but not this final one that you're talking about.
Right. You can use characters of Holmes and Watson, Moriarty, whatever, but if the stories themselves are still copyrighted, you can't make a movie version of that story, right?
Right. Yep.
Well, so yeah, the practical examples of that are the Winnie the Pooh horror flick, and also speaking of Sherlock, there was a television show with Hugh Laurie called House. It was actually like a mishmash of a medical drama, and he was based on Sherlock Holmes, the main character, House.
Oh my God! I had no idea.
And the producers were free to say, like, yeah, this is totally, we took this from Sherlock Holmes, and they were working most likely in the public domain because the story was different enough that they could say, no, this is just based on that character that we saw in the first book. So maybe that's what we'll see moving forward with things like Mickey Mouse. We're just going to reimagine it and put, Lucy Liu in as the character of Piglet or, whatever it is.
Right.
You just blew my mind.
I've got lots of great
Makes total
ideas.
sense that House
the
Sherlock.
tortured genius with a drug problem. Yeah, that's Sherlock Holmes. Right.
Total narcissist.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep.
You guys can look forward, if you're interested in what was released this year, just Google what, Laura?
Public Domain Day. 2023, and you'll see, some of the stuff that that is now public domain. And I'll tell you, I on purpose didn't tell you the name of that Agatha Christie story because I am working on a play version of it, and I don't want you to take it from me.
Ooh.
So, leave me alone.
End on a cliffhanger. I like it.
And that's all we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Find Laws Don't Judge Me. Please subscribe to, rate, and review our show wherever you listen to podcasts. Check the show notes for related content. And if you'd like to contact us, send us an email at findlawpodcasts@thomsonreuters.com.